thanks, Karen, for inviting me to go into a way back machine in terms of Dundee and looking through the rearview mirror at some people that were here before Dundee was even a twinkle in anybody's eye. And so the little thing this morning is just an exploration of Dundee and the American Indian people who were here a long, long time ago. And also, as we go through, we'll try to dispel some myths that people typically have about what an Indian is. So what we want to do is look at the original settlers, and I hope you can read this. I don't know if you can or not, but I'll help walk you through. We want to know where they come from, who in the heck were they to begin with, how did they live, where did they go, and where are they today? We know they're not here anymore, but what happened to them? Where are they? Well, where'd they come from? Long, long time ago in a place far, far away, they started a migration. And this is Siberia, probably one of the coldest places in the world. And at one point in time, there was a land link from Siberia over to Alaska. And remember, Sarah Palin said she could see Russia from her window. That's how close it was, but that's where the people actually migrated from, down through Alaska. And 15,000 years ago, a long, long time ago, made their way down through Canada, into parts of the U.S., and even all the way down to South America. And, you know, when did they hit Dundee? Nobody knows. I mean, it's anybody's guess. It was just a heck of a long time ago. So some of them found a home in Dundee and Kane County. And you can see Dundee up there is a little bitty star, runs down along the Fox River. And so there were settlements really on both sides of the river. And who were they people? They were people of a lot of different languages and cultures. You know, people sort of stereotypically paint American Indians as one group, when in fact they are so different from one another that it's like the difference between ourselves and a Chinaman, for example. But most of the people in our area were from the Algonquin group, and that's a huge language group. There were Athabascans, excuse me, which turned into the Navajo and the Apache, but our people were Algonquin, and they were Sauk, Fox, and Potawatomi. And Potawatomi means keepers of the fire. So they were basically looking for food, shelter, and really a better life. And here's a little trivia thing. Do you know what Illinois means? It means tribe of superior men. And that's an Algonquin word. Chicago means stinky onion. So here is sort of an overview of where the Potawatomi people really took residence. And it's a huge area. As you can see, it goes all the way from upper Wisconsin, all the way down here to middle Illinois, and over to Michigan and up into Canada. And at one time, this group lived over here, where the Iroquois lived, and they knocked heads, and the Potawatomis lost and moved over our direction. And so that's where they settled. How did they live? This just sort of gives you an artist's conception of what some of the villages look like, and more specifically, shows you what things look like on a seasonal basis.
And are those wigwams?
They're not wigwams.
What are they?
Well, you could call them a wigwam, but they're just huts. And you know, this is the summer, and people really preferred living along the river on some flat land because it gave them the water and it gave them places to grow and to gather food. in the winter, they sort of shifted gears and used buffalo hide to make something that sort of looked like a teepee, but it wasn't really a teepee. And of course, the main mode of transportation was the canoe. And there were just peaceful people that lived day in and day out in their little villages, much like you and I, except they didn't have cable television. That didn't come till a little bit later. So they were really fishing, hunting, and gathering families is what they were. The buffalo provided food, shelter, and clothing. In the Fox River, they say at one time, you could just walk out into the Fox River and just scoop up fish. There were so many fish. And of course, the prairie provided berries, grain, tobacco, and a lot of other things that really were a source of better life for the people. This is what they weren't. There were no chiefs like this guy. There were no Indian princesses like a lot of people. I have people come in my shop and say, well, my mother-in-law's hairdresser's sister was an Indian princess, or she's part Indian. And I said, well, which part is that? But so they weren't any of those, and they sure as hell weren't these guys. But what they were people that looked pretty much like this. You don't see a lot of war bonnets, and they're basically farmers. And with a lot of the Indian communities, family was first. And like everybody else, moms and dads worked. They taught the kids. And of course, there were tribal politics, always politics. And the day-to-day routines were hunting and fishing, growing and gathering food, building summer and winter shelters. They tore down the summer ones and built the winter ones. They made pottery for cooking. And of course, they had ceremonies and spent a big part of their time harvesting buffalo. Speaking of which, the buffalo. This area used to just be mobbed with buffalo. Anywhere you turned, there was a buffalo. Just tons and tons and tons of them, everywhere. And so the people made good use of the buffalo. Just to give you an idea, they used every single part of that animal, either for housing, for food, for headdresses. They made saddles out of them. They made pottery. Buffalo poop was used to keep them warm. So that was a very, very key part of the life of these people way back when. And a day at the office, for a lot of them, was trading. And you can see the trade routes extended way up into Canada and way down to the Quapaw region, which is down in Mississippi. And they traded primarily with the French, but also with a whole bunch of other tribes. And here's kind of what they traded. They exported furs and slaves, slaves and porcupine quills. And then they imported goods from the Europeans, metal goods, beads, things of that nature. And then they also imported slaves from other tribes that they in turn exported to the French. So slavery was alive and well in Indian country.
What type of slaves? I mean, what type of breed is it?
They would, of course, they raided each other a lot. And so part of that would be to take kids in the raid and then take them back home with them and really make them part of that tribal group or part of the family. But then they would also trade them to the French for beads and things like that, and the French would put them to work.
So the slaves weren't much different from the people who captured them?
No, they were almost the same, yeah. It was a totally different kind of slavery than we think of. down south. Yeah, it was a whole different thing. In our area, two places seem to stand out in history, as much history as there is, and there's really not a lot of it. But Cedar Swamp was one place, and today it's called the Trout Park Nature Preserve. And that area, as we showed in an earlier slide, was just ideal for the lifestyle that these people lived, because there was water, there was a lot of land, there was a bountiful harvest of grain and whatever. And then Hager Hill, in this little book, this book is out of print now, but it was a great book by the Dundee Historical Society, found the remains of 15 people on the hills at Hager. And so that probably was tied into the Trout Nature Preserve area and served as a burial ground. And probably people didn't live there, but it was their cemetery. Yeah, yeah. But there are very few remains anywhere anymore. Where did they go? 3 guys and a couple of treaties. And we'll talk about this a little bit. First of all, does anybody know who these 3 guys are? And would you like to meet them in an alley? No clue, right? Okay, the first guy is a guy named Makataimi Shikiakuk. Let's say it 3 times in a row. And today, people know the guy as Black Hawk. And he was a war leader of the Sauk. And back in 1804, there was a treaty signed that ceded all the Potawatomi territory and all that around it to the U.S. government. And that pissed Black Hawk off. He didn't like it. And so he started butting heads with the settlers. And he brought down an army of people. His army was maybe 500 warriors, and mostly old men and kids, and started harassing the settlers. And so the government got going on him. And in 1832, they sort of destroyed the whole Black Hawk operation, and Black Hawk surrendered up in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. But that was the start of it. It was called the Black Hawk Wars, and you can read a lot about those.
You can see Black Hawk out on the Rock River.
Yeah, big sculpture. Where did they go? Here's another guy, Shibona. There's Shibona all over the place. You hear about him everywhere. Well, who was this guy? He was a chief of the Potawatomis, and he and Black Hawk did not like each other at all. They just banged heads all over the place. Black Hawk tried to drive the white settlers out, and Shibona said, wait a minute, you know, they're bigger than we are, we think. And so he actually rode ahead of Black Hawk, warning people that the Black Hawk Raiders were in the neighborhood. And then he acted as a guide to the white militia that finally put Black Hawk out of business. So those 2 guys weren't friends at all, even though they were from the same area. The final guy is this guy, Wabansi. And that's a familiar name in Illinois also. And he was actually a leader of the Potawatomi people. And he liked to get into battles. And he fought in the Battle of Tippecanoe, where he got destroyed. And that was down in Provincetown, Indiana. So the final nail was when he signed a Treaty of Wabash back in 1826. And remember, that whole big Potawatomi area that I showed you before was sold to the government for 50 cents an acre. So you want to buy some land? Wabansi. So this whole area was sold to the government. So that started something that was a death walk. It was like, pack your teepees and get out of here. The people didn't have a choice. So they walked 660 miles, and it really went from Indiana through Illinois and over into Kansas. And of course, a whole bunch of people died along the way. They just came through like a vacuum cleaner, cleaned them out, and they wound up in Kansas. An interesting little sidelight, there was a missionary named Father Petit who worked with the Potawatomi people forever. And he sort of led the people on that trail. And when they hit Kansas, he got sick. They shipped him back to St. Louis. And he had a little mission in South Bend, Indiana, that today is Notre Dame. And this priest is buried at Notre Dame. And there's all kinds of Potawatomi things there, including a museum. But like a lot of other Indian people, they were just chased out.
What was his name? Father what?
Father Petit. Pettit, yeah. So the legacy, the remains, there's nothing left of them, except we got parks, expressways, mounds, highway markers, but no people at all. And looking back, they were engineers. I mean, it's interesting how things developed, because we talked about the buffaloes, and the buffaloes made distinct trails that the people then started using that turned into Chicagoland's highways and expressways today. Those are all old buffalo trails. And about the only things you see left are the Black Hawks. You see a Wabansie High School, some mounds, of course the expressways, and the people are all gone. No more. So where are they? They're in Oklahoma, they're in Kansas. There's a little teeny group of people that live up in Milwaukee still. But basically, they're gone. And these are pictures of some of the people today that look pretty much like you and I do, except their skin's a little browner than ours. The rub-off from the walk with the priest still sort of holds on, because they're really sort of tied to the Catholic Church in a great degree. And the woman up on the upper right is a lady named Poponi, whose name is Snow Woman in English. And Poponi is a good friend of mine. Her work, she's a potter, and to this day she comes back to this area to gather clay to make her pottery. She is just such a traditional Kickapoo person that she comes back and does that. And her work is in the Smithsonian and a lot of different museums, and it's also in a little shop across the street. To get a, yeah, that I know.
Where does she live?
She lives in Denver. And her mom lives on the Potawatomi Reservation in Oklahoma. But she is really a traditional
So there is a
Potawatomi person.
reservation.
There's one in Oklahoma, there's one in Kansas. Yeah,
Probably
yeah.
pretty small compared to what they used.
Yeah, they are. You know, I think the big one in Kansas is maybe 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. So that, my friends, in a nutshell, is a little bit about the people in Dundee from a long time ago, who they were, what happened to them, and where they are today. And that's all she wrote.
Thank you.
Thank you.